I'm an Australian lawyer who grew up in the middle class in Sydney. I was not a child at risk, neither was my child. I now act for many children who were at risk, but their risk has materialised. Those children are current and former inmates of the Juvenile Detention Centre in Western Australia. My firm, Levitt Robinson, has brought a class action against the West Australian Government in the Federal Court of Australia. The West Australian Government was called out by Amnesty International in 2018 for its inhumane treatment of child detainees. Rather than make serious amends, the West Australian Government has just doubled down. Populist political parties in Australia say they want to get tough on youth crime. Amnesty International has just condemned the new Queensland state government for its election credo, adult crime, adult time. When the basic needs for a child's physical and emotional well-being are not being met, that child is a child at risk, unlikely to make a successful transition to adulthood without society's help. In Australia, Indigenous children are grossly overrepresented among children at risk. In fact, 29 times as many Indigenous children are incarcerated in Australia as non-Indigenous children, as a proportion of the population. Globally, the World Health Organization estimated that at the end of 2022, 1 billion children aged 2 to 17 had experienced physical, sexual, or emotional violence or neglect in the preceding year. Children are the most sinned against members of society. Early exposure to violence can impair brain development and may result in educational and vocational underachievement and emotional dysfunction. Children at risk have learned from experience that adults are not to be trusted, having been the victims of crimes far more serious than any offence that they have committed. Their respect for authority is shot. The age of criminal responsibility in Australia, New Zealand, England and Wales is just 10 years. In the Philippines, surprisingly, it is 15. The Defence of Infancy recognises that children still have a long way to go in their social, emotional and intellectual development. They're also dependent on adults and on adult power structures to safeguard their well-being and provide moral guidance. 350 years ago, Enlightenment philosophers John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, among others, described the social contract by which citizens accept the state's authority in exchange for the state providing for their protection and welfare. Children lack the capacity to reach reasonable decisions, so they cannot be contracting parties to a social contract. Children at risk owe nothing to civil society or to the state. They have only experienced suffering and deprivation, while so many of our children have been nurtured and even coddled. So children at risk may not share our values or adhere to the norms of civil society or to our double standards. Corruption at the top is tolerated while the police crack down on street crime. In the Philippines, between 2016 and 2022, according to varying estimates, there were between 8,000 and 30,000 state-sanctioned extrajudicial killings, including of hundreds of children. Hardly anyone has been held to account. Under cover of the war on drugs, the victims' children were impoverished, orphaned, or both. The loss of a parent, often the main breadwinner, means that children stop going to school There is no money for transportation, for food or school supplies. Children of slain victims have been left to scavenge on the streets. It is nonsense to talk about rehabilitation. You cannot rehabilitate children at risk because they have never experienced habilitation. Rehabilitation means to restore someone to health or normal life through training and therapy. But the baseline for children at risk is generally neither health nor normalcy. They cannot be restored to a condition they have never enjoyed. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967 recognised that it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he should pick himself up by his bootlaces. In 2021, UNICEF estimated that there were more than 260,000 children in detention worldwide based upon available records, though with many states not reporting. As of June 2022, the average cost of imprisoning a child in Australia was almost $3,000 a day. Most children in custody have undiagnosed disabilities and do not receive help and support. A 2023 Queensland Children's Court report has identified the incarceration of children as the single biggest predictor of a lifetime of crime. This is supported by international studies. Rather than wasting billions on incarcerating children, we should be investing that money into battling child poverty by supporting families, grappling with the impact of family violence and sexual abuse on children, providing youth mentoring services, youth refuges, and paediatric mental health treatment facilities. A substantial majority of children who have been imprisoned will reoffend within 12 months of release. Diversion is essential for channeling out young offenders from the juvenile justice system to avoid the stigmatising and soul-destroying effects on children of formal justice system involvement. We have the 1989 United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was unanimously adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations and ratified by the Philippines as the 109th country to do so. But nevertheless, it is used more for spin than for substance. Few countries outside of Scandinavia have implemented effective intervention programs for children at risk. In Finland and Norway, they recognise that the interest of the child is the paramount consideration, which they're obliged to do under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. But that consideration is largely ignored and only the subject of lip service in other countries. We all have a choice. Do we want to save or to condemn? Let's not obsess about the right to life while losing sight of the quality of life which we are willing to provide to all of God's children. Either these children will die early through suicide or misadventure, or we will have to face them as hardened criminals if we continue to crush them under the weight of our cruelty. Thank you.